Okay, we are live and we are doing Shulchan Aruch and we're going to do tour of Siman Chaf. This is Yora Deah Siman Chaf. And we're talking about Shchita, Makam Shchita B'Tzavar. The place to slaughter is the neck, Bekana L'Tzad HaRosh, the trachea, Bekana L'Tzad HaRosh, on the side towards the head, Mishpia Kaiva Al-Mata, from the lower edge of where the skull goes and downward. For who, Kaidem, Shaskel, Kaiva, therefore, the skull begins to slope upward, lamata and downward, ad makaim shlegia una helyana, until the point it reaches the upper lobe. So let's look at a picture and see what that is talking about. So this is a chicken, and we're going to be looking at, here we go. So now looking at where the skull goes. If you see my mouse, this is a profile of an animal. So when the skull starts sloping upward from its mouth, going up and then down. So here, this is right behind the ear. This is the skull part. So you go down to the neck, this part, all the way down to the bottom, where you can meet the thorax of the animal. The animal is suspended by its legs, in other words, upside down. Then, when it's hung by its legs, the lobes would extend downward until you reach to the upper lobes of the place of shchita. This area comprises the full length of the neck from the thorax until basically the bottom of its chin. So as the animal naturally extends its neck when grazing in a usual manner. So in that manner, not when it overly extends it, but when it extends in the usual manner, or that entire part of the neck, that's where you could shecht. That's what people say. You don't know where to shecht on a giraffe. You know where the neck of the giraffe is. By the way, giraffes are not the only animals that have long necks. You could look, deer have long necks. Other animals actually have long necks also. Provided the animal does not strain itself, when it extends its neck, more than it's what's necessary, or what's usual, last size kishihiraya. Then when it's customary for it to graze. Uba voshet, and in respects to the esophagus, on toward the it's on the side of the head, a hand's grip length. So the esophagus starts from on a hand's grip length below that. And from that point downward is the place of shchita. Ad makaim the shear until Shiashir, until the point where the hair begins. Peirosh ad makaim meaning that until the point where it has tufts of hair. In other words, obviously the neck, every animal has hair and there's hair on its neck, but it means on the body of the animal. Similar was found on its belly. And for a bird, it's going to be until the crop. So what is the crop? So let's look over here. Let's get a picture of the crop over here. Okay, so you see the crop over here, and sorry, this is not the crop. This is the crop over here at the bottom of the neck. So you have the whole entire neck from the head to basically its thorax. And the top of the crop, that's the end of the neck. And that's what's going on by a chicken. Or by any bird. They all have crops over there. Ukidei, tfisa, prusha, rashi, arba, etzbais. And the hand grip, according to Rashi, is a full tefach. It's 4 finger. Bahag, peirush kadei, shechoit, b'shtei, etzbais. So only like 2 fingers. Grab with 2 fingers. V'hainu roi v'etzbais. Roich of etzbais. And really it's the width of a finger, not the full length of the finger, it's the width of a finger. Ushir is there bishar gadol, and this applies even to a large ox. Ushar behema chaya v'aif kifi gadlai. And every single animal, whether it's a chaya, aif, or a behema, according to respective size, you could basically estimate it. Lemidas zeshir, that's a portion standard. B'schila shchayte and kineged ha'garon. Really, l'chafila, you should shecht exactly opposite its throat. If he shechts on the side, it's kosher. But he knows that he severed the vital organs, the trachea and esophagus, before he hits the spinal column. So he wants to go from the side. That's fine, also, but he has to make sure he hits the simonim first before he gets to the spinal cord. That's why it's always better to go from the front. Ki hasimonim rakim b'fnei hasakin. Since the vital organs are soft, they could be misplaced and pushed back by the knife. If he does not know that he cut them first, certainly. Hashaykhet mina ayref psula. A shaykhet who does from the nape of the neck it's invalid. In other words, come from the back, that's invalid. Sha'arei chayte chamafrages tchila, and he necessarily cuts the spinal column first. Because he comes from the back, he's not going to hit the trachea and esophagus before he hits the spinal column. However, if he repositioned the vital organs toward the nape, explore it there, then it's good. Otherwise, he schlupped them all around, then it's good. Ad Khan, this is the tour of Yora Deah Siman Chaf. Now do the Shulchan Aruch Siman Chaf. And there are 4 seifim. Sif Aleph. The place of the shechting is the neck, the trachea, the side towards the head, from the bottom of the skull, going downward, and before the skull begins to slope upward, and to find the point of the chitin. That's where the chitin is. For who should and the upper end of the trachea. Yesh these there are within the 2 large rings and 2 small nodules in the neck. In other words, this is the sort of the voice box of the part of the thorax of the trachea that has the cartilage over there. That's made of cartilage. Perish Targum, it's Perish in Targum, in other words, in Aramaic, Bedal Eisen. In other words, it's the same type of material that the ear is made of, which is cartilage, and it's wrapped around the esophagus. And it's called the chitin. And if he shechted within the chitin, the shear mehen kol shehu l'mayla kshera, and even left the slightest portion of them above, then the shechit is kosher. Sharei shachat pishoy kaivel mata, since he slaughtered from the skull, from the slope of the skull until downward. If he did not leave anything over there on top of the cartilage, Ella shachat l'mayla mehen, he shechted above the cartilage. This is a grama. This is like a grama, and it's puzzle. So in other words, the cartilage. You can feel it by your Adam's apple. You can feel this as cartilage. Anyone knows anatomy that there's wrapped around the trachea. There is some cartilage that helps make the sound. So an animal makes a sound or a human makes a sound. That's where it is. That's what we're talking about. You should shecht over there on that thing or right below that. So you cut the esophagus, then cut the trachea, then cut the esophagus after that. That's your simonim, the cartilage, really. You could do below, do above, you're running into problems. You might go too high, and then it's already considered a part of the head. Perish grama. What's the explanation of this grama? Hachora hasaki and chutz l'mukaim shchita litzat haroish oy litzat haguf. That he's directing the knife outside the proper place of shchita, either toward the head or toward the body. It's not going to be in the right place. Ideally, one should always shecht below these large rings and not on them or above them. V'shir lamata ad reish kanaf una, and the lower boundary extends to the top of the lobe's wings. In other words, where the chest spreads out. When inflated upright and it rises upwards, in other words, the animal breathes in. Until the point where the head reaches the trachea. This is very point. This is the place in the animal. The point of the contact with the animal was alive, and it was grazing in the usual manner. In other words, it exposed when it's grazing in the usual manner. It naturally extends its neck to graze. Then that all that part is considered part of the neck. Without forcing itself to go more than its normal range. kimai bevoshet. And on a bird, it's lower than the trachea. It corresponds to the esophagus. Sibes, uvashet with respect to the esophagus. But chila hamakoim shemsoichin oisai mischavetz. The place of the shechita should begin at the point where it contracts when he cuts. Ad makom shiashir until it extends to the point where hair appears. The Yischel La'ois Pratzim Keres, and where it begins to show segmented protrusions like the stomach, V'shachat, Lamaila, Mokamzet. Once slaughtered above this point, V'hua Nikra Turvat Saveshet, this is called the Turvat Saveshet. I lamata hamakamzeh, or if you did it below this point, or this beginning where the intestines are, shchita psula. The shchita is pasal. V'shir turva tzaveshet she'eno roy l'shchita, and the extent of the entire turva veshet is really unfit for shchita. L'mayla behem of chaya, both for a behema and a chaya. Kadesha aites b'shtei etzbais. The width we can grab for 2 fingers. So right at the base of the skull, you grab 2 fingers. Anything above that, that's not going to be good. Lashon Rambam Parak Aleph, Michal Shchita Din Hey. Hagot. The Rama says, V'yeshayim, and some say, Kidei Roichav Arba Etzbais, you do 4 Etzbais, like Rashi, Kabbalah Biyad Hagdoimin, the tradition from the Orient authorities, Shabachal Behem Mechaya, all Behem Mechaya, Hashir Ad Makam Shigiyah, Shal Oizen Behema, that the measure extends to the point where the animal's ear reaches. Let me show you again on the, if we could share the screen again. So we see where the animal's ear reaches, like we said over here. This is the point of the ear where the base of the head. You go down to the neck, and there we go. That's where you grab. And below that, that's where you shecht. Again, you go to the base of the ear, you go down, that's the part where you grab, and below that is where you shecht. Okay, shroifen eisai. And when it's bent downward, then downward. Okay. Ubaif hakol lefi gadla v'ktanai, and birds, everything is determined according to their size. Hagav v'ain chiluk bein yono l'shar oifis, and you don't make a distinction between a dove, which is very small, other birds which are much bigger. Nuchula and shira and shava, really measurements are all the same. Lamata ada hazefek, lower part from the crop. Hagav v'aif she'ain loy zefek ad bein hagafayim, for a bird that a crop, it extends between its wings, the base of its body. The top part of his body with the base of the neck. Lafi she'ein anu b'ki and b'shur leilu. Since we're not b'ki in the shear, nachal l'shchait be'emsas hatzafar l'arka. But always do the middle neck. She'achaz yaitze meyedei safek. Therefore, you're avoiding a safek. Always do the middle neck on all animals. You avoid a safek. Shachar sheichat shvitay be'emsa hatzafar. If you want to do on the side of the neck, ve'im shachar tzadim. And if he decide it's valid, someone he finally hits the vital organs first. Yora Deah, as long as you always cut through them before you hit the spinal cord, or the spine. Because it's very soft and they move away from the knife with pressure. The same applies if he did it from the back. He'll have to bring him around. If he doesn't bring him around, obviously he's going to hit the spine first, and it's not going to be a good shchita. Toiv lizoher lemashmeish absamanim l'shasir kaitim shchita. So it's proper to be careful to palpate and grasp the vital organs for shchita to keep them in place. Kadesh you have to do kaitim b'shar tzavar. Therefore, you know that they come forward and present the flesh of the neck. But Yainim Nimsa Masamanim Sadim and a dove, and the vital organs are found on the sides. V'tzarach Imun Yadayim Oziros G'dayim. This requires trained hands and great care to bring them forward, to know exactly where they are. She'im Loi Yashish Behem V'zamnim Lafanav Kaidim Shkita. And if one does not palpate them and bring them forward before Shkita, Karav Hadavar Miyad L'Pshaya, it is very likely that he's going to err, it's going to move away. L'chat Chayich B'rakis Kaidim Asamanim, and cut the spinal cord before the vital organs. Now the Pischei Tshuva, B'shiyur Torvat Savashet. What's the place of the measurement of the Torvat Savashet that we talked about before, which is the very top of the neck? He says Ayin B'shuvas. What his grandfather, the Panameter, it says. Be'heriktiv says on the side. So Perush Mitzad Smile Ukishbehema Raya Yetza Yesa Min Haguf Mishal Yamin, Shehi Avar B'Yaser, that in the left side where the animal grazes, it protrudes farther from the body, and for the right side, which is even thicker, V'Kasa B'Shach, the Ein Lahach Shelamayla B'Duas Gedoyla, that the Shach writes that the shechting above the large cartilage ring is not is deemed to be is cannot be deemed kosher at all. And v'chein das marshal, so the Marshal says, "Afal pi shamabach einoi matir ela makam hefsen ruba." Even though the Bach said it only in a case of great damage was this good. Yesh lahakol kedas amachaber v'chein hu shchitas kenazem. And if we could be lenient, and shchitas kenazem is that it's fine so long as you left a little bit of space above the cartilage, above it. Kasav B'Habes Yosef Lamaila B'Kana Ba'ayif Loi Hisker, right, and where you can't recognize above it Loi Hisker Shulchan Arech B'Peirash Mahudinai. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say what the din is. Aval Misklias Loshainai Nirash Shedinai Nami Pshia the Koiva V'Lamata V'Kamai Behema. However, it's the general wording makes it seem like likewise also from the slope of the head and downward skull, just like with all animals. The rumin perishataz that or hamek kamet navanase kmotim b'makam shchita v'chalal machzeh. The Talmud explains that the valid place of shechting, the skin contracts and it forms a fold in the neck, thereby covering the cavity that's made when the trachea and the esophagus go into the body. Whereas the turbats, the cavity remains exposed and does not contract. Psula will be possible. Because of Bashach, Rabam, the Kaimalon, Shchito, Gameris, Loi, Psul, Have, Nevela. The Shach writes, and the name of the Rambam is considered a Vela for maintain. Anything that renders anything invalid is still deemed an Avela. But Nafkamina, Lidan, just didn't im hayinavela le'inyan isai v'es benai look at the el simin tezai and sif and the sif test. The practical application for us is classifies the vela with respect to the revision of it and its offerings. In other words, what would be considered a real vela? We see in simin tezayin. We saw that before. We see before. Etzbais in his fingers. Because of a shach, we call behemoths v'chayis shavin bein gadol bein katan. The shach writes that all animals and wild beasts are equivalent to the measure of everything, no matter how big or how small they are. Baby animals, adult animals, has the effect to crop. Pirush shach ad gagois has the loy gagoy b'chlam. The shach says it extends upward to the wall of the crop, the ceiling of the crop, but does not include the ceiling at all. It has to be completely above the crop. It cannot include any part of the crop. If one checked it on the roof of the crop, and if you see that it's a white membrane, then he knows that he reached it. And therefore, that it's not going to be good. Also, the simon of the crop is that it doesn't have two membranes like this that's found in the esophagus. You want to have the double membrane, like you see in the esophagus, and then you know he did simonim. Hasakin, and then I chosav b'shach dimre mashma sorry hamachaber mashma detarte b'inyan, and the shach writes so the chaber to imply the two requirements chazara simonim v'gam sheda shechzer kaidem mavrekes, that you have to have repositioning of the simonim and know exactly where to sever before you hit the spinal cord. And really, this is really against Gemara. For certainly repositioning the simonim alone is effective. But Tzarech Leimar, the Yedan, he knows who vav and it must be a different. The word the vav and he knows means it's a vav or nose, not and. It can't be that it has to have both. Umin hastam imla yechzer yesh laser. If he did not reposition them, the slaughter must be prohibited. So as long as he gets the sumana position, that's good. And if he checks afterwards and he doesn't hit the spinal cord, that's also good. Because of Taz, the done a nafka mina klal b'din zeh. The Taz writes there's no practical consequence of this at all. The ha ikar chashosh Kan Shema Chase Chamafrekes Kaitem Samanim. The primary concern is where the spinal cord is cut before he hits the Samanim. The Yanan Svaran Osur Afilu Chatach Mafrekes Achar Samanim. It would be saying that it's prohibited even if the spinal cord is cut after the Samanim. We say you hit the spinal cord, no good, unless you have hit the Samanim. Know that it's Samanim first for sure. Sif Zayin. Umash kasvabach sheim chasach b'shar tzavar kaidem hasimonim yesh laser chaylik alav hataz. The Bach rules that if the flesh of the neck was cut before the simonim, it must be prohibited. The Taz disagrees. You don't have to do any order. You could hit soft flesh if you want, as long as you hit the simonim before you hit the spinal cord. The heavy raya ladavar. There's the proof to his words. The gamin lochosh l'shum tzad isur shahaya kol zman shloigavia hasakin. This is proof from this that he further states that there is no concern for prohibiting delay so long as the knife was not lifted. You keep going. There's no shahia. There's no delay. That's fine. Even if you hit the skin first and flesh first, as long as you get to the simonim without lifting the knife. Shoichet shehu iter yad. A shoichet who is left-handed. And he's trained accordingly. He does not slaughter precisely at the midpoint. He goes really at an angle. Nevertheless, since he severs the samanim first before he gets to mafrekes, so the spinal column is good, and he really doesn't have to. As long as he's holding the stuff with one hand, so he holds it with his right hand, the trachea and esophagus, and he shechs. There's no difference what angle he comes from. It's going to be kosher. Upshita she'ein laviroi b'shvil lezeh. It's self-evident is not that he's not miruf physician on this account, just like the Truvas Yaakov says.